Well, let's look at a few trends to start with. We're going to look at the global economic recovery, the vaccination status, inflation, and then the role of tech companies, which is a very interesting situation. So the US is really pushing the global economy. You see this with GDP growth and our exports, and mainly our imports. Vaccination status, we're about a quarter of the world population has got one dose. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the US. We used to be number 1 or 2 in the world. We're now about number 20 in the world as far as percentage vaccinated. Interesting, the International Monetary Fund came out this month and said that as far as inflation is concerned, there is inflation, but they use that word transitory, and they say it's supply-demand mismatches. In other words, once we get back to supply and demand being more in balance, that we should see the inflation decline. And then one of the stats that I've recently come across is the role of tech companies. Tech companies now, if you look at the global GDP, they're equal to almost 28% of the global GDP, up from 5% in 30 years ago. That's really amazing. Okay, so here's the International Monetary Fund projections for this year and next year as far as GDP growth. Our typical GDP growth in the United States is about 3% a year. Last year it was negative, almost 4%. This year it's back, and next year it'll continue to be high. You'll see that the big countries, first world countries, are seeing very good GDP growth, especially when 2 to 3% is very good for them typically. Some of the places, developing economies, and Latin and Caribbean, especially Latin America, the Caribbean is pretty much a disaster right now, and probably will continue to be for a while because of slow recovery. Now, this is the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago, and here's where that comment came from about us pushing the rest of the world. So we're sitting at a very high recovery rate. With 100 was 2019. We're almost back to where we were then. China's ahead of it. India is ahead. But you can see that there is fairly robust growth in lots of parts of the world. Now, this one's a little hard to see. This is a GDP per capita or per person, again, by the International Monetary Fund. We're about $60,000 per person. Canada, about 46. The UK is 42. Russia is 11, and China's 12 per person. So it's interesting to see the dichotomy. If you look at Africa, it mostly is single-digit thousands, but we and the G7 countries are usually in the 30s to 60s, 1,000 per person of GDP, gross domestic product. Now, this is a new slide for vaccinations. I've always shown you a different type of slide. This is the share of the population with at least one dose of vaccine. The darker the country color, the higher the percentage of vaccinations. If you looked at this 2 months ago, the United States would be in the highest level. We've fallen way back. We're sitting at about 49% of our population has had at least one dose. We've fallen behind China, a lot of Europe, and as you can see over here, Canada at 71%. They were about 2 months ago. Canada was about 15%. Now they're 71%. We're seeing a lot of reluctance to vaccinate in this country, and as a result, our cases are going up. China says they've done 55% of their population. God only knows where that statistic comes from. Down here, you'll see that Australia and New Zealand just began vaccinating, and they're way behind. And as a result, Sydney is closed down and just announced to be closed for another month in lockdown because they don't have enough people vaccinated. I don't quite understand that. But look here in Europe, you've got 40s and 50s, and those were in the teens 2 months ago. Why is this important? Well, I'm an international business person, and we're only seeing people interested in new investments, which are bringing brands to another country where we see lots of vaccination, high percentage of vaccination. We're really busy in Europe right now. It is Katie bar the door in Europe. The economy is coming back very fast. And then you've got first world countries like Australia that are basically closed because they just haven't vaccinated. Japan has gone from about 5% 2 months ago to 25%, but still behind. India, 7, South Africa, 4, disasters. This is a very interesting chart that came from Bloomberg and the IMF. It says, what percentage of the world's gross domestic product is tech companies? And as you can see, it's about 28% tech companies in here. If you look back in 2000, it was about 21%, and then 2010 about 13. Now it's up to 28% of the total GDP of the world is in about 21 countries, companies. It's really astounding amount of money in those companies. I love this chart. This chart says where do the various states do business? And red is China, and of course maple leaf is Canada, and then this multicolor is Mexico. So you can see that Texas, Arizona are largely, most of their imports come from Mexico. But look how much of the country is China. It's just stunning when you think about it. And then secondly, it's Canada, which I think is pretty amazing because Canada is not that big a country, but it is nearby, of course. But most of the imports into California come from China. I think that's a little too much, frankly, but I know. You may remember last month we looked at interest rates, tax rates around the world, because our friend here in the United States is trying to get everybody to have a 15% corporate tax rate. And look at the tax rates in Latin America. Going down to 15% would basically, from my estimation, bankrupt those countries. If they were only getting 15% tax rates, they would go bankrupt. So it bothers me that we are pushing for 15% around the world, and we're not really thinking about those people who really can't afford to do that. Now, my good friend Norm, who's on here with the port, will recognize this picture of containers and knows Guy Fawkes. This is a couple of days ago. There were 110 vessels in the ports, the 2 ports, 52 at anchor, and it was taking 5 days to unload and load a container. And they were starting to anchor all the way down to Huntington Beach. The supply chain is not fixed yet. That's obvious. And by the way, this is not the busy time of year. We're just beginning to get ready to go with the goods coming in for Christmas. We've got a real challenge. Bill asked me to put something in about Turkey. And some of you know that I lived there for a couple of years and I do business there. And of course, Bill loves to go there, and we have our good friend Mehmet Baraktaroglu on. But the inflation rate is just astounding in Turkey right now. I'm sure Mehmet, I can't see his head, but I'm sure he's going yes. But and then the president wants to cut interest rates because he thinks that will lower inflation. Brian, I don't think that cutting interest rates lowers inflation, but maybe I'm wrong. This guy is a little bit of a challenge. So that's my turkey picture for this year or this month. And then last but not least, I always have a good, interesting picture. This is real. This is an elephant that crashed through the wall of a restaurant in Thailand looking for food. And I always like to have something that's a little fun. And it turns out they come to visit quite often. This was, I thought that was funny. They always come because there's a local market and they can smell food. So they're visiting. The elephants came through the wall visiting the restaurant. And that's it for me, Bill.
Hey.